people nowadays go shopping for their new band members on YouTube.
Okay.
And it's wild because, yes, there are incredible players out there making these videos, and they're obnoxiously good. Like it's disturbing to watch some of them. But to me, it feels weird because you're grabbing somebody with no experience and thrusting them on these larger gigs where they haven't done the legwork to even be emotionally ready for something of that size. Like when you get on a stage playing a festival and there's 90,000 people out there, that is mind-blowing.
What's up, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls around the world? I would like to welcome you back to the Real Talk with Zuby podcast. On today's episode, we have got on another awesome friend of mine. He is a drummer, a musician, a composer, and this is Pete Parada. Welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, Zuby. Great to see you again.
Great to see you again, Pete. I've done a real brief intro there, man. For people who are not familiar with who you are and your work, let them know about you.
Yeah, like you said, I'm a musician, primarily a drummer and also a composer, but probably best known for drumming in some punk rock groups like Face to Face and Saves the Day, and I had a 14-year stint with a band called The Offspring. I've also done tours and studio work with My Chemical Romance, Devo, Rob Halford from Judas Priest, Chris Shiflett from Foo Fighters. And so I work here. I live in Franklin, Tennessee, and work out of my home studio doing drum tracks for people, making sound packs for Splice, and writing and composing music for whether it's film or TV or commercials or just about anything.
Awesome. How did you first get into music?
I got into music when I was a little kid. So my dad was a band director of middle school, high school. And so I had two older brothers, and I knew from watching them that I was going to have to play an instrument. And my oldest brother had played the clarinet, and so I watched him struggle learning all these fingerings. My other brother played saxophone, same thing. So I was like, I don't want to struggle with that. I'll play drums. And I had been, like kids do, you get pots and pans and you're clanging on stuff and making racket. But, when I picked drums, I thought I was getting away with a fast one. Like, okay, I'll do this, and then I don't have to learn all that hard stuff. And then, along the way, just fell in love with it. Didn't realize that was going to be, what I did, what I was drawn to. So I started, as a little kid, and I didn't take it too seriously. I'm from a really small town of about 1,000 people in upstate New York. And I got dragged out to a concert from a local band from the big town. The next town over was 10,000 people. And that's where my dad taught. So I went to see this band play. And for me, when I was growing up, and you're so isolated, and this is the mid to late 80s, you watch these bands on MTV and stuff, and you're like, oh, for me, I was like, I could never play like that. I couldn't. And I got dragged to this show to watch this band play, and here's this kid a year older than me playing exactly like all of those people. And it just, whatever block was in my brain got removed from watching him do it. I was like, oh, if he can do it, I can do it. And that was it. The next day, went home, started practicing, and I went to my dad, and I'm like, hey, do you have this kid in your high school band, Mick Palmisano? And he's like, oh yeah, he's a really good drummer. I'm like, why have you never told me about him? And he's like, oh, well, my dad was pretty blunt. He's like, well, he's really serious about it, and you're not. So, and I was like, all right, that hurts, but true. And I kind of took it to heart, and just really, from that point on, my whole focus was, drumming and music, and I'm going to do this. This is what I want to do. And so I ended up moving with that same drummer, Mick, to California.
Today's episode is brought to you by BitBox. As I'm sure you've noticed by now, inflation is a major issue. The more money that central banks print, the less your dollars, pounds, and euros are worth. When it comes to government-issued fiat currency, inflation is inevitable. That's why for many years, I've been saving in Bitcoin. It's scarcer than gold, and it cannot be inflated by any central bank. But if you're going to buy and hold Bitcoin, it's vital that you store it securely, because leaving your coins on exchanges is risky and leaves them vulnerable to potential hacks. That's where today's sponsor, BitBox, comes in. BitBox is a Swiss-made hardware wallet that allows you to store your Bitcoin easily and safely. It only takes a few minutes to set up a wallet and take full custody of your coins the same way I do. Secure your Bitcoin today with a BitBox. Go to bitbox.swiss/Zuby to get 5% off a hardware wallet today. That's bitbox.swiss/Zuby for 5% off.
everything just kind of rolled from there. From moving out there, he was the one person I knew, and he thankfully took pity on me, took me under his wing, and was like, okay, you're completely lost here. You have no idea what you're doing. I went from tiny cow town to Hollywood. Like, we lived right behind the Chinese Theater off of Hollywood Boulevard, and so I'd never been in that kind of environment. So the first couple of weeks there, I was just terrified of everything, like going out and going to school and back. I was like, I'm gonna get mugged, I'm gonna get murdered.
How old were you at that time?
I just turned, like 2 weeks after I turned 18.
Okay.
We took off, drove across the country in his van, and just had an adventure. And he really was just a lifeline for me, to helping me figure out, I had no idea what I was doing. Didn't know how to grocery shop or like how to live. So I just kind of copied everything that he did. And he was like, oh yeah, okay. Because he was a year older than me. So he had been through that. And he's like, yeah, okay, you're where I was last year. I'll teach you everything you need to know. And really kind of shepherded me through just being on my own for the first time, being that far, 3,000 miles away from home for the first time. It was a lot. But thankfully he was there with me through all of that. And when we got out of music school, he had, went and got married. And so I ended up moving in with one of my instructors from school, who is now the drummer for Korn. His name's Ray Luzier. And now he lives 10 minutes from me in Franklin, which is like, so 30 years ago, we were roommates for a couple of years, and now we're, practically neighbors, which is nice to have, those people still in your life after that much time. But yeah, for me, music really all started with my dad. He was very much into more like symphonic band and marching stuff. Like that was his world, but he loved Frank Sinatra. So we always had music in the house. But primarily my start came from him. And I think a lot of what I've done since then was, you want your dad to be proud of you. You want your dad to be excited. And he's been gone for 20 years, but he got to see me, get pretty far into the industry. I was making records. I was out on tour. Like, he got to come see me play. So for me, that was huge to be, to at least be able to start making my living playing music, while he was still there to see it.
Yeah. And what was that process like, of getting to the stage of being able to actually make a living from it?
Man, it was a lot of false starts. And, when I got out of school, I started bussing tables at a restaurant in Beverly Hills because the manager there, her father back in New York, was one of my dad's best friends. So she gave me a job there to start making money, and I'm living with Ray, who was one of the busiest drummers in town. And so he would kick me down gigs that he didn't have time for or wasn't interested in. So I got to cut my teeth there. It's the same story of paying your dues as a musician, like you do your day job, so that your nights are free for rehearsals or shows. And, I just started joining bands and playing to 3 people at 12:30 at night on a Wednesday at some club in Hollywood, but you grind it out, you get that experience, and you start meeting people. And for me, I think things picked up for me when I got a job working at a rehearsal studio out in North Hollywood in the Valley of LA. And at that place, I met all kinds of bands were coming through all the time, whether big bands or small bands, like the Chili Peppers rehearsed there, Stone Temple Pilots rehearsed there. They were there when they were still called Mighty Joe Young. They were one of the first bands I saw when I got to LA. And I was like, oh, these guys are cool. And then, 2 years later, everything exploded. But, through working at the studio, I ended up in this punk rock band called Face to Face. And that was really the start of my making a living in music. And that was 98, and I've just kind of never stopped. We would go out, we'd be touring in buses, playing, we do clubs, we do festivals, we do opening slots for other bands, but that band worked. Yeah. And we always were taking new bands out on the road with us. So then I met all these other younger bands that were on their way up, and our band was really good about picking openers that were about to break through. And we always had a joke that, if we ever did a farewell tour, I was going to start a new band and open so that we could be huge. And then when we did that, I didn't do it, but the band that we took out was My Chemical Romance. And during that tour, they also exploded.
Yeah.
I don't know. So it was
They've done
just,
all right.
yeah, but it was like a great way to meet so many people, and to really get out on the road and in the studio making records. Like, it was my first time doing all of these things. And those guys were really cool. Again, like, took me under their wing because they'd been doing it for a while and like kind of showing me the ropes. So it was a really great learning experience because I had people who were willing to teach, instead of just having expectations. I think they kind of enjoyed that this was my first go around on things. And, it's like when you have kids or something and you watch them make these milestones as they're growing and you get to see things through their eyes. I think these guys were like, oh, look, we got fresh energy in the band. Look at this guy. Everything is new. And it was fun a very creative environment to be in. And I didn't know anything about punk rock. But they were looking for more of a rock drummer to make a record that wasn't quite so punk, but they also needed someone to play, the punk rock stuff too.
For the uninitiated, what's the sort of main difference there?
Yeah. Okay. So a lot of like more hardcore punk stuff is very fast, like really speedy tempos and, really high energy that you have to be able to keep that up. And for the rock stuff, more middle of the road, you want something really solid, really heavy, like a groove. And they wanted someone that could do both. And they were auditioning drummers where I worked. And I didn't know anything about their band really. And so I didn't give it any thought because I'm like, oh, I don't play punk rock. That's not for me. And a friend of mine had tour managed them. And he said, hey, you got to go. I got you an audition. You're on the list of all these people they're going to look for. And I'm like, well, I don't even know anything about their band. And he's like, well, figure it out. You're last at the end of this week. So I, went into their room and stole their live CD and just learned the whole thing. Because when you go on these auditions, a lot of times it's very much, they'll give you a really fast song and a slower song to see if you can pull off both aspects of what they're looking for. And so while I sat there listening to all these people audition all week, I could hear like, oh, that guy's got the fast stuff down. Oh, he's really clunky on the slow stuff. Or, wow, he's super solid. Oh, he's never played the fast stuff. So, but to hear them be that burnt out by the end of the week of playing the same two songs over and over and over, when I went in, having a bit of an advantage of watching what they had done, I'm just like, hey, you guys tired of these songs? You want to play something else? Because I could tell they were burnt, and then looking at it like, oh, here comes the kid that parks the cars and cleans the toilets. Great.
And this is the band members themselves?
Yeah, like you could tell they're like, we are scraping the bottom. We can't find what we're looking for, and now it's come to this. But then we got to play something that they, were more excited about, and it really locked in right away. Like, I could pull off the fast stuff. To me, it was like heavy metal with one foot instead of two playing double bass. And so it really quickly was clear that it was a good fit. And, everything has kind of stemmed from me getting that job, through Face to Face. I met a band called Saves the Day and played with them for 5 years. Also played with a group called Alkaline Trio. And, you kind of build up your resume from, working with these people. The Face to Face's bass player, Scott, his brother Chris is the guitar player for the Foo Fighters, and he wanted to make a solo record. So he had his brother and I do the rhythm section on that. And, every step along the way is more experience. And that's the thing. I think people nowadays go shopping for their new band members on YouTube.
Okay.
And it's wild because, yes, there are incredible players out there making these videos, and they're obnoxiously good. Like it's disturbing to watch some of them, but to me, it feels weird because you're grabbing somebody with no experience and thrusting them on these larger gigs where they haven't done the legwork to even be emotionally ready for something of that size. Like when you get on a stage playing a festival and there's 90,000 people out there, that is mind blowing, and it can crater you if you're not grounded and ready for that. And I would be afraid to take someone who has never done a van tour playing crappy clubs and drop them in that situation. Like it's almost asking too much of somebody. And I would imagine mostly sink or swim, they're going to swim, but it seems like a strange way that business is done now versus how it used to go.
Yeah. Well, I think that applies to most industries, certainly anything entertainment wise, but even outside of that. I mean, we've now got this merger in everything of the digital and the
Mhm.
physical world. I
Mhm.
mean, we're doing it right now.
Yeah.
We're in the real world having a conversation,
Yeah.
but by the time people are able to listen to this, it's going to be
Mhm.
on their iPhone or on their Android or on their computer or in their car,
Yeah.
and they could be in a whole other city, whole other country,
Mhm.
different time zones. And it's fascinating. It's interesting, this merger that's happening. And I think music was one of the first industries and sectors where that really happened. I think the music industry was one of the first ones to be
Yeah.
digitized. Maybe photography was
Yeah,
one.
but photography, when it got digitized, it didn't change the monetization of the business model, right? Where
Mm,
when music went digital, then all of a sudden music became free. Now no one buys records anymore. You have your subscription to whatever streaming service you prefer, and you listen to whatever you want. You pay your $15, $18 a month, whatever it is. But the artists aren't getting the revenue like they used to. When people bought records, artists could make a living selling albums, and then you went on tour to promote that. And now it's shifted to where the whole industry is based off of tickets and t-shirts,
mm.
like, because your music is an excuse to go on tour and make money that way, but you don't make it from anyone buying music anymore. It's very, very minuscule. The payouts from all of these services is terrible, and it's kind of like the Wild West. There used to be rules and order to how this thing worked, and now there's not. Like, the record I played on with the guy from Foo Fighters, he had a song back in the day placed on this popular TV show ER.
Mm.
And so when every time that episode aired, I got paid again. When it went to VHS, I got paid again. When it went to DVD, you get paid again. When it went into syndication, you kept getting residual payments on this thing that you created. And now it's very much a different model, where it's like, here's your flat rate. We'll use your song. This is all you get. And it's really changed everything. And it started when everything got digital. I know Metallica took heap loads of crap with the railing
Napster
against
thing, yeah.
Napster and stuff, but here's where we are now.
The speed of it is crazy. The speed that it's all happened is insane. I mean, I've been doing music for about 19 years now. And when I put out my first album, 2006, it was all CDs. If you were said the word streaming to someone, they'd think you're talking about a river.
Mm-hmm.
iTunes wasn't even really a thing. People weren't downloading. It was all CDs. People were going and selling. Top artists were selling millions, or going diamond in CD sales.
Yeah.
And 2006, maybe for my younger audience, that sounds like a really long time ago.
Yeah.
But for people who are maybe 30 plus,
Yeah.
it doesn't seem all that long ago.
Mm-hmm.
And then you shifted into, iTunes became this massive thing and people buying those downloads. And then you have this whole streaming era. And within about a decade, it went, it changed medium 2 or 3 times.
Yeah.
Just in a really short time. And I think for musicians and everyone involved, I think for certain types of artists and certain types of musicians, the digital shift has been a big benefit. And I think there's a lot of people who have like sort of blown up and made it now, who maybe wouldn't have in the previous era. But then there's also people who were sort of more suited
Mm-hmm.
for that more analog era and the way that it was monetized. And now, they might be struggling more in the digital world, and it's all just kind of confusing. There's not really a blueprint for it.
It's wild. And for me, the loss is more on the artistic side of it, because I remember being a kid, or even, as much as 20 years ago, I would be so excited a new record came out, and I'm listening to it and I'm reading the lyrics and pouring through all the liner notes. Who played on this? Who's a special guest? Who are they thanking? Like, every bit of that mattered. And now it's like, you're hard pressed to get anyone to listen to an entire album in order anymore.
An entire song.
Yeah, it's just singles, or, well, do a single or do an EP. Just put out 4 songs. That's enough, and it's tough to grab people's attention spans. And even the data now on how much music is coming out a day, there's like 100,000 songs a day getting released into the world because everyone's got a recording studio on their
Mm-hmm.
phone now. When I was a kid, if someone within 100 miles of you had a 4-track cassette recorder that you could make a decent sounding demo on, it was like they had a recording studio. They had a glorified cassette player, but that's all there was. And now the amount of stuff you can do on an iPad or your phone, it's insane. It's insane. And you can make it sound good. I mean, and now you can perfect everything. Like you can really go and take something or someone who's never sang before, you can make them sound brilliant. There's so much you can manipulate that it's harder and harder to feel anything from the music. When my kids were little, my daughters are 20 and 16 now. When they were young, I would only have like the 90s station on in the car because I wanted them to hear music before Autotune. I wanted them to hear before Beat Detective, before everything got perfected. And because I didn't want their ear to be tuned to that perfect thing. It's like, yeah, listen, like these vocals are off, the timing is off, but it's real, it's human, and you just try to kind of impart that on them because everything nowadays just goes into a computer, slapped on a grid. It's really rare to hear anybody not even recording to a metronome or something, to just let something flow, let something be.
It's funny you say that. When I was recording, my most recent album came out in 2021. And when I was recording it, I actually multiple times had to say to my studio engineer to leave it somewhat natural, because I'd listen, I'd record, and then he'd get an initial mix down, and I'm listening to the mix, and I'm like, why am I sounding like especially with rapping, because like he did this thing even where it would like remove my breathing.
Yeah.
So normally rapping, especially if you're rapping fast, like like you breathe, and there's this thing like cut out all the breaths. So, but it sounded like too clean. It made it like, it gave it this slightly robotic, robotic thing. It was like too
sterile,
perfectly on beat. Like I was just like, no, bring the breaths back. Like I need to hear the breathing. I need to hear like the little ad libs or whatever, because it's too clinical.
But and that adds to the feel. I mean, there's an old story I heard about Quincy Jones making Thriller with Michael Jackson, and they were mixing it, and Michael was like, well, you know what, that doesn't sound right. I don't know what's going on. And engineer somehow had been in there removing all, because he made a lot of noises while he was singing and whatever, and some of it was rhythmic for himself, but they were trying to take all of that out, and he's like, no, put that back in. That's where the feel was from. But it was like, yeah, don't take out the imperfections. That's what makes it. That's what makes it human. And it feels like right now, I think, I mean, the pendulum's always swinging with art, with music, with anything. I think that there is a real hunger building for people that want to hear something real. They want to hear something more human. I know I always react when I hear like a Elliott Smith or somebody like that was just a guitar and vocals, and it's messy and it's sloppy, but you can tell they're pouring their heart out through this song, and it doesn't have that shiny sheen over the top of it. I think that there's a market for that to come back, to where people are tired of hearing everything so shiny and perfect and with that little sheen on it, and get back to something a little more real. At least I hope so.
Today's podcast is sponsored by my book, Strong Advice, Zuby's Guide to Fitness for Everybody. When it comes to health, exercise, and nutrition, there are a huge number of resources available. Some are great, but others, not so much. The problem with a lot of fitness advice is it's unnecessarily complicated. This can leave you feeling even more confused, with underwhelming and unsustainable results. Most diets fail, and even when they do work, most people simply regain the weight. Strong Advice is different because the sole goal of the book is to help you and not to confuse you. It's simple enough for beginners, but detailed enough for experienced lifters. No nonsense, just valuable information. Strong Advice has already helped thousands of people to achieve and maintain their fitness goals, and whether your goal is to lose fat, build muscle, or just get in better shape, it can help you too. Visit zubyfitness.com to get $10 off the ebook or audiobook version of Strong Advice. That's zubyfitness.com, and as a loyal podcast listener, you'll automatically get $10 off. Enjoy the rest of the podcast. Another trend that's certainly happened a lot in hip hop, and I'm sure it's in other genres too, but the just the vocal processing,
Hmm.
which is quite literally making rappers sound like sort of melodic robots. And I'm like, I don't know what this person's real voice even sounds like. There's
Hmm.
just everything has this processing effect on it.
Yeah.
And some people like it. I'm not personally a fan. I tend to prefer the just natural voice,
Yeah.
not the weird robotic stuff. A question I do have for you, actually, now that we're on this topic, is what are your thoughts on the AI stuff that's going on in music? Because I've heard some gnarly stuff.
I'm a little scared of it just because it's so simple for, I mean, a buddy of mine had showed me, he was like, oh look, I told it to write a punk rock song in the style of Green Day with the vocals of, Sex Pistols, or some weird combination, and I gave it some lyrics and it spit out this song in 10 seconds, and it's fully produced, like it sounds mixed and mastered, and you're just like, what are we doing if we're just going to tell the computer, like we're all people in Wall-E in the chairs just going, make me a song that
Yeah.
sounds like this and that, and then it just does. And so it's kind of like, well, where's the creativity in that if you're letting the AI do all the work for you? In my mind, and I struggle with it all the time, composing and stuff, it's like, well, I can hear this thing, how do I translate it? How do I get it out of my head onto the computer or on through the keyboard or whatever? How do I record this? And it never occurs to me to go, oh, I'll just ask the computer to do it.
Yeah.
The computer can't hear what I'm hearing. It can, I guess, if you get really specific with it, maybe it can pump out some results, but it just feels wrong to me to depend that much on something like we're creatures of convenience that are getting like convenienced into apathy. Are we creators anymore, or are we reliant on something else to do the work? So I'm iffy on the AI thing.
Yeah.
I've got friends that swear by it. A guy I grew up with, he makes amazing videos now, and like he's making his own movie, it looks like, where everything is in AI, and I'm like, yeah, I guess if you can make it that way and you don't have a budget to go shoot it in the real world, or if you're making some sci-fi fantasy thing that you would need $200 million to make, maybe that's cool. So I don't know, but I'm apprehensive. That was a really long-winded way of saying.
No, dude, be as long-winded as you want to be, man. There's no rush. I feel similarly to you, and I think over the course of time, I spent a lot of time just thinking about this century, and I mean, I think people massively underestimate how much the world changes in a lifetime.
Yeah.
So, I mean, if you imagine, what's 100 years ago, 1924. If you were to go back to 1924 and tell someone all of the things that are going to transpire in the next 100 years, World War II, everything that's happening, all the technological revolutions, mobile telephones, the internet, GPS, social media, smartphones, just like going, all the social, cultural, political, technological changes, all of these things all happen in like a person's lifetime. And I'm thinking now, okay, children being born now, by the time we're in the year, 2050, 2060, 2070, 2080, you can't even, there's certain things you can kind of predict, but it's like, gosh, we have no idea what is going to happen this century. And it seems like as time progresses, just because of the way technology grows, the speed of change increases as well.
Mm-hmm.
So, 2000, the difference between 1900 and 2000 is bigger than the difference between 1800 and 1900.
Yeah.
And the difference between 2000 and 2100 is going to be even bigger. And one of my concerns, I guess, and apprehensions as you have is in the realm of artificial intelligence. And, I say this as someone with a computer science degree who actually did a module on it when I was in university a while back. I'm scared of, I don't say I'm scared very often, but I worry that I always believe technology should exist to serve humanity. Technology should be the slave of humans, for lack of better terms, not the other way around. So I always think technology should be an addition. When it becomes a replacement, that can often be a concern. And I think the thing with AI is it can actually replace people. It can replace people's jobs. It's not just, oh, okay, people are washing clothes by hand. Hey, here's a machine which you can load and it, does some of that for you. It's like, no, whether you're a creative, you're a lawyer, you're a trucker, you're a driver, you're a dentist, like whatever you are, we're just going to make something that can do exactly what you do.
Maybe with more precision.
And to me, that's scary. I mean,
yeah. Well,
10 years ago, people were like, oh yeah, there's AI, but it's never going to replace musicians.
Mm-hmm.
And now we're like, oh.
I feel like science fiction has been warning us for a long time about this, and we're still just going, no, we're going to be cool. It's fine. But yeah, I agree with your apprehension, and I like your analogy that it should be like more of an embellishment of what you're doing. But when it takes the place of creativity altogether,
yeah.
Or, even the fact of, all of us spend too much time on our phones, right? And I think for creative people, a lot of the best stuff is going to come out. I mean, it comes from daydreaming. It comes from maybe being bored or having this downtime where you're just free to think. And if we take all of those times where we're free to think and instead we hop on to check social media or our email or look up, silly websites or videos, we're losing that space where we can really think and create. Like I'll do a lot of my best composing, even if it's just drum parts for somebody. I will, if I'm taking on a walk or something that gets my brain moving, or if I'm driving, I get a lot of ideas there. So I try not to always be having something on to listen to or something to do, like to leave that space for possibilities to show up. And, it doesn't always happen, but if we are more and more shrinking the time that we're allotting for that, I'm wondering how that affects creativity, and especially if someone can just lean on, AI or to do their homework or to write their song or I'm stuck on this thing. If you were to approach writing for a movie and tell the AI, oh, in this scene, this girl just said this to the guy and it's very emotional, give me something with strings and whatever, it would probably bust something out. And, so then what did you do?
And in a couple generations, it will just atrophy that creative muscle.
Right. And also it's atrophying the creative muscle for sure. And it's stunting growth of original ideas. Like AI, as I'm a drummer, I hit things for a living. So, work with me here on my technological babble. But as I understand it, AI is fed information, and then it uses that vast knowledge to quickly come up with something that you ask for, drawing on all the information that it's been fed. So if you were telling it, to write a music for this scene in the movie, and it just busts something out, that's recycling other things that it's heard before. It's nothing original. If you ask John Williams to write music for that scene, he's going to come up with something incredible that you've never heard before because it came from him. And only a genius like that is always going to come up with the goods. Like I don't know that guy has ever not nailed it when he's, doing, whether it's Spielberg's films or anything. And so to me, yes, the computer can spit something out for you. It's not going to be the quality of someone like John Williams, who's made their entire life about music, about creating, about digging and finding that extra thing that you're not expecting, or what's gonna make this movie land in a way that you wouldn't expect. So I'm hopefully a little optimistic that it can't just replace everything, but we get accustomed to stuff. Everyone's accustomed to auto-tune now. We're accustomed to hearing things that are perfect, so who's to say in 20 years we're not just accustomed to hearing the same thing on every movie soundtrack or every pop song or whatever, because it's just a regurgitation of what's come before.
Yeah.
And
it's there's so many, I have so many thoughts just like flying around my brain as you're speaking. And the word that keeps hitting me is soul.
Mm-hmm.
And that is what is being removed.
Yes.
And that to people who are more religious or spiritual, they'll probably immediately know what I mean. For someone who is not inclined that way, it might sound a little abstract because soul is not something that you can sort of measure or quantify or perfectly even define.
Yeah.
But at the same time, I think everyone knows when we say, oh, something's a bit soulless. People know what that means sort of inherently. And I think that's the thing with AI. So it's like, yeah, it can replace and it can recreate. It can create in a way that's recreation. And I guess it could always do that. And for people who don't particularly care about the soul aspect, sure, maybe that'll be fine, right? Some you can eat processed foods all day and they're okay with it. Is it the best thing for them? No, but they can technically survive. It's technically food. It's not really food.
It's getting them through the day.
Yeah, and I think that's what's happening kind of with entertainment, with music, is it can be like, okay, here, we're just going to, boom, 10 seconds, you put in your prompt, 10 seconds, it spits you out a song. And technically it might be good and it might sound nice, but the human element has been
removed. There's something missing. And I think as long as we can tell there's something missing, we still got a shot, right?
Yeah.
But
I've just had an interesting thought. This is what I think it's like. So, and funnily, we're here in Nashville, so this is very relevant. So obviously Nashville is a city, home of many great musicians. So let's say there's an auction for some famous musician's guitar. And then you can have the same guitar. Hey, here's the same guitar, but it didn't belong to that musician, right, and it wasn't played on. So one of them is infused with the soul and the story, and that's why this one will sell for 1,000 times more than the other one. But someone who's like purely materialistic might be like, it's the same guitar. It's stupid that this one is selling for $250,000 and this one is selling for, $1,000.
Yeah.
But I think as human beings, we still recognize, no, I want the one. They might look exactly the same, but they're not the same guitar.
Yeah, I want the one that got played on that part. I mean, one of my best friends is a guitar tech to the stars, and he has a guitar that was given to him by a very famous player and who passed away. But he has the guitar now, and instead of just shoving it in a box or hanging it on a wall, he loans it out to, because he knows everybody in the industry, so he will loan it out to other guitarists and other musicians and be like, why don't you take this guitar for a couple months, do something with it, get some inspiration out of it, and then they give it back and he gives it to somebody else. And it's just like this traveling symbol of, but, infused with soul of decades of this performer who had worked with this instrument and was one of his favorites. And now it's, popping up all over the place. And I had no idea he was doing it until like a couple months ago. I took him when he came to Nashville and we went to somebody's house and we picked up this guitar and I was like, oh God, is that their guitar? And he's like, yeah, I just loaned it out. I'm going to give it to so-and-so next week and I'll get it back in a few months. And I'm like, not worried about it. Like that's a valuable instrument. He's like, no, anybody I loan it to has reverence for it. They're going to take care of it. But to me, it was just the coolest thing. It's like, no, it should still be played. It should still be inspiring people. Like, it should still be in circulation, creating music and adding soul to it. So I just thought that was like the most fascinating little story. And he's my best friend in the world. I didn't even know he'd been doing this for years. So it was really cool.
I love that you use the word reverence. I feel like that's a word that is lacking in our society and culture increasingly. It's one of those words you don't really hear that much. The idea that something should be revered or something having a sanctity to it. And not everything. I don't know. I just think things are just increasingly materialistic. And when I say that, I don't just mean in the sort of, when people hear the word materialism, they tend to think of just like, oh, someone who's materialistic, they like shiny objects and expensive things. I don't mean that way. I just mean viewing a worldview where everything is just the raw physical objects and the atoms and molecules that make it, rather than there being anything spiritual or any soul or any godliness or any sanctity. And I think we're sort of losing respect for that massively to our detriment. I think if I look deeply at a lot of issues and problems that people talk about, kind of at the core. This is often the thing that's sort of fundamentally at the core, where all of that is just being like, that doesn't matter.
Yeah.
And we can survive without it. And it's like, for a while, sure, you can survive. But I think for things to thrive and for humanity to really thrive and flourish, that has to exist.
I agree. And I think, like you're saying, we're losing this little bit of soul. I think we're so distracted by stuff that really doesn't matter that we lose sight of things that do. And then when you say like, oh, nobody has a reverence for this anymore, or no one looks deeply into it, they say, oh, that doesn't matter. And there's a loss there. I think, for all the progress that we've made in the last few decades, some days it feels like, was it progress, or have we lost what mattered, and now we are consumed constantly by shiny objects or the newest thing? Like the news cycle goes so fast now. I mean, it burns hot, it can run you over and then move right on to somebody else. And it's wild how no one has any whiplash over it. They're just kind of, I think a lot of people are just trying to survive day to day. And we lose that aspect of the spiritual or the intangible of like, oh man, I used to love this record because it made me feel this. And then you hear something new and you're like, I don't feel anything from that, So I agree. There's a loss in there when we don't take the time to remember like what made us happy to begin with. Like, why did I start playing music? Why did I do this in the first place? Oh, let me find my way back to that. And I don't know. I think I just steered us off a cliff.
No, it's an important discussion, because I think every issue under the sun, societally, politically, socially, I think there's a tendency to always talk about them on the most sort of shallow and obvious level.
Mm-hmm.
But there's very little, at least sort of mainstream and public discussion of the deeper underlying things that are going on. So to give an example, we kind of briefly hinted towards it, but you hear a lot of talk these days about, say, like mental health, mental health issues amongst teens, amongst men, amongst women, what's going on, everyone, mental health, depression, anxiety, mental health therapy. And not a lot of people seem to be like, okay, like, let's go real deep on this. Like what's at the core of this? And I'm not saying I know like every single answer, but it's just, oh, okay, here's a pill for that one, here's a tablet for that one, here's a pill for that one, here's a therapy for this. It's like, but what's actually going on? Like, why are these numbers going up and up and up and up? It's like, yeah, sure, smartphones are a factor, sure, social medias are a factor, but is that all? Like, isn't there other stuff that's happening that's making people feel that loss of meaning, loss of purpose, loss of direction, burnout, disconnection, loneliness? There's a block to there. Why are so many people feeling lonely? Cities are busier than ever. There's all these people here. People are more interconnected than ever, but you have millions of people out there, men in particular, who are literally saying like they don't even have like one friend.
Yeah.
And it's like, what's going on?
Yeah, well, you can make all of these digital online connections, but who do you have in your life for real? How often do you go see an actual person and just have a conversation and turn off your phone? And it's, and I feel we've been over-medicating as a society for my entire lifetime, especially with, antidepressants, SSRIs, things like that. I think human connection is, for me, the best medication that you can have. When my wife and I met, I was very depressed. Both of my parents had passed away pretty close to each other in the early 2000s. And I just kind of kept working. Like I was touring with one band, then I joined a second band so that I was always on tour and I never had to be home and I didn't have to think about it and didn't have to deal with it. And when I met her, I had tried like Prozac and whatever, and it just always gave me like fuzzy burning in my head. And so I went on this other medication called Paxil that was supposed to be, this is going to be better for depression or what you're dealing with. And it was an absolute nightmare. Mm-hmm. Like, I got on it. I started feeling like completely not myself. And then they were like, oh, well, here, now you also have to take Wellbutrin. That'll that'll even you out. Now that'll make you happy. And I'm just like, well, what's the first one for if that one's going to make me happy? And I finally, my wife's looking at me and she's like, this isn't right. And we just threw them all in the trash. But for about 2 weeks coming off of Paxil, I was an absolute nightmare of a person. Like, not violent, but aggressive and just angry. And, for me, that was the end of me and pharma. And this was 20 years ago. And I was just like, nope, I can't do this again. For me, the medication that got me to finally deal with, the loss of my parents and things was my relationship with my wife. That was what I needed. I needed connection. I needed another human to help me, not just someone going, yeah, here, oh, you're depressed, here's a bunch of pills, go and take these. And now to find out that the ultimate results of all these medications were not much benefit to anyone and a whole lot of detriment. And it's so common now that people are on so many multiple medications. I went to the eye doctor a year or two ago and he's like, oh, okay, well, new patient, going through the checklist. And he's like, oh, well, what medications are you on? I was like, none. He's like, no, I mean, like, what prescriptions are you taking? I was like, none.
He was surprised?
He was shocked. He was like, wow, good for you. I don't think I've had anyone in here in a couple of years that is not taking at least 1 or 2 or 3. Wild. And I was like, wow, that's crazy.
And it's especially wild because it's not like this in most of the world.
No.
The USA is so over-medicalized, and I feel like most Americans are maybe slightly aware of it, but not to the degree that it is. And when I often think of things from a historical and a global context, and it's like, okay, so for all of these thousands of years of human history, like we don't have new emotions that our ancestors didn't, right? Everyone's been dealing. Everyone's been dealing with all of these. In fact, life used to be far more difficult, and people were dealing with famine and plague and constant war and babies dying, infant mortality, women dying in childbirth. Like all of that stuff used to be awful. But were they depressed and anxious and this and that? Or if they were, what did they do? Like they didn't have the option of, here, take this pill. Yeah. They clearly had other ways of minimizing it and dealing with it when it came around. And even right now in 2024, in most of the world, all around the developing world, where there isn't access to just, here, take this pill, take that pill, take that pill, and their lives are objectively harder. Yeah. And there's less material comfort, yet the depression rates and the anxiety rates and all these mental health issues, there isn't this same crisis that's going on. And when it does come around, it's like, okay, what are they prescribing over there? And like, probably nutrition, exercise, family connection, getting close to God, going back to church, like all of these combination of different things. And so it's just so bizarre that in this modern times, it's like, okay, this will take care of that symptom. Okay, now, and gives you these new symptoms. So here's something for that symptom.
Yeah.
And you can see the financial benefit to it, obviously, for a small number of people, but it's a bit weird to me how it's kind of been tacitly accepted by people that, okay, yeah, that's normal and that's just how it is. I'm like, no, it's not normal.
Well, and that the U.S. and New Zealand are the only countries in the world that are allowed to have pharmaceutical advertisements. I mean, you're from England. I mean, you're everywhere, but originally from England, am I right?
Yeah, that's right.
So when, I think it was a year and a half ago, there was some big Harry and Meghan thing going on over here that got broadcast and people were watching it in England, and all the comments online were like, these commercials are hilarious. Like, what is that? They don't even tell you what the drug is. It's just like, ask your doctor if this is right for you. And there's people jumping in and out of bathtubs and running through a field. And yeah, it's so suggestive. Like, well, let me go ask my doctor. And we can try that. He's going to write you that prescription. They're going to give it to you, but you don't even know what it's for.
And then when they list the side effects.
Yeah. Oh, that's the best. My kids love that one. They're like, oh, here they come. All right. It would be laughable if it wasn't so sad that's where we're at with our health and our society. My wife's younger brothers just went to Japan for the first time. And so we were helping them get ready for the trip, because I've been there a bunch of times before, and we're looking through all the regulations there. And I was shocked, because it never mattered to me. I didn't have any prescription drugs, so I never looked into it. But you can't even bring like ADHD medication or SSRIs or any of that stuff into Japan. Like it's not allowed. They do not have that there. Like it was very specific of, we don't do that here. Don't bring that.
You can't even bring it in.
Yeah, it was wild. I was like, okay, I thought it was going to be like, I knew like don't bring marijuana or whatever. Like but this was right down to prescription meds. Like, no, don't bring this. Don't bring this. We don't do that here, which was wild to realize that there are places where the stuff that we give out like candy here is not even allowed over there. Well, even to our food, you can look at the version of Fruit Loops that we have in the US, and the list of ingredients is this long, and then European Fruit Loops have like this many ingredients in it.
And they look different too.
Yeah, they look different.
Fruit Loops in particular, they're much more dull in color in Europe.
Yeah.
And then here they're like bright, like radioactive bright.
Yeah. And so you got to ask, you're like, well, do we need all those ingredients? Then why do we have them? What's the difference of putting them in here just because we allow it, where other countries, won't allow GMO kind of food like that. And it's just here, it's fair game. Like we're going to dump whatever we want into the food and no one's going to ask any questions. And even it's harder and harder, even when you're trying to shop well and get organic food and stuff, like they'll slap the natural label on anything. It means nothing. It literally means nothing to say all natural or this or that. It's just what they can get away with. And, then you get bogged down in dealing with the regulators and how all these industries are funded by the people they're supposed to be regulating. And none of that is good for the population. None of that is good for us. But that's the system, and everyone just goes along with it.
It is. At the same time, I'm glad that there's increasing awareness about all of this. And there are increasing numbers of people publicly speaking about it, from people who are actually doctors or who do have experience with pharmaceuticals to people who are, lay people or commentators, podcasters, people like ourselves who are just like asking questions and, poking into the hole, trying to be like, hey, what's going on? And of course, it got massively accelerated after all the events of 2020 to 2022 and all of the madness that because that was a global thing as well. Oh, so that's caused so many people to just ask questions. I mean, if after that whole period, if you have no questions, might not have a functioning brain. Actually, maybe you should see your doctor if you have no questions about that time period.
There's a pill for that. So.
If that all totally made sense to you, then maybe you're not thinking. And of course, this is how I first came across you.
Yeah.
I first came across you because I saw a tweet on Twitter at the time where you were explaining the situation that had happened with your band. Was that 2021?
Yeah, it was 3 years ago, 2021,
yeah, 3 years ago.
August. Yeah. Yeah. And it was amazing that you saw that because, and I know I thank you every time I see you, but you reposting that early on got it in front of people who would be receptive to what I was trying to say, because anyone who was speaking out against the vaccine mandates or anything that was happening at the time, you were just crucified. I mean, it was just a flamethrower. And that's what I was expecting. I wrote to one of my best friends right before I put that statement out. I was like, hey, posting it now, bracing for impact. And I just expected a firing squad and flamethrowers. And it really, at first it just kind of, some of the fans were confused and asking questions, and then it started getting shared. When you shared it, then it was shared everywhere, and people were pouring in with support. And I did not expect that at all. I was, mostly just trying to let people know, like, hey, here's why I won't be on tour, on this tour that's coming up. Because I had people hitting me up for tickets, like the band was playing in Nashville, and everyone's like, hey, I want to come to your show. And I'm like, how do I tell people 5,000 times that I won't be there and why I won't be there? And I didn't want to have to say it over and over and over. And so I was like, well, we'll just say what we need to say. And, here's why I won't be there anymore. I'm not getting this vaccine. I'm not allowed to come back without it. Here's where we're at. And there was plenty of people that showed up to, throw crap at me. And I've been called all kinds of fun names that, I don't identify with. But the outpouring of support from people from around the world, like so many people that came out and said, hey, I thank you for saying something. I thought I was the only person that felt this way, because you weren't allowed to talk about it. And that's what it felt like for me was, it's not like anyone cares who's playing drums on Pretty Fly for a White Guy. It was not a big deal that there was going to be a different drummer in that band. To me, it was, I've got kids. And if we all lay down here and give up our rights to decide what goes in our bodies and not, it doesn't stop there. It's like, oh, they were willing to allow us that. Let's push more. Let's take more things away. So for me, number one, I was out of a job and I needed to find work. And by skulking away and not saying anything, because I was afraid of being labeled an anti-vaxxer or whatever, nonsense they want to throw at you, it wasn't good for me, because it was like, if I don't show my kids how to stand up here, that there's no opportunity, there's no amount of money, there's no job or anything that's worth giving up your bodily sovereignty. Like, they need to see me do this, because when you have teenagers, they stop listening to you, but they're watching. They take everything in by what you do. They don't take as seriously what you say. And so it was kind of like, all right, well, Dad's going to light his life and his career on fire here, because it is this important that you get this message. And both of them were doing musical theater at the time here in Nashville, and the theater community was maybe the worst of the real COVID heavy, like masking and testing. And, they were getting a lot of pressure of, oh, you guys didn't get the vaccine yet, you're not vaccinated. And
just to jump in there, why do you think that is? Why do you think those particular communities were so? I
think that it's a great question. My opinion is the rise of the virtue signaling crusaders really took over a lot of these areas, because it wasn't political for me not to get this. It was medical for me. I've had a history of bad reactions to vaccines. I'm not going to go through that, especially with a new technology. It's not good. I had a medical exemption that was disregarded, by my former employers. And, so for me, there were so many things going on that made no sense. If you're out there saying, we're so noble, we're so virtuistic, everyone's got to do this so we can protect the people who can't get it, and you go, hey, I'm one of those people, and they're like, nope, you don't count. You need to get it too. We're not talking about you. We're talking about faceless, nameless people who can't get it.
Grandmas.
Yeah, so it was like, okay, so it doesn't even matter. Like, even that virtue signaling was a lie. Like, everyone's got to get it so we can protect the people that can't, because if you couldn't get it, you were still supposed to get it. And then if you wouldn't, then the consequences are all on you. And it's like, well, I know my body and I know my history, and I know this is going to mess me up. I've already had COVID. I'm not overweight. I'm not on prescription medications. I don't have diabetes. I have no underlying medical conditions. There's no benefit for me to get this. There's absolutely none. Yeah. So why should I? And
it's also crazy that people feel you even need to explain it.
Well, that was the other thing. It was like, but I was like, well, I need to work. So if somebody's willing to have an unvaccinated drummer out there, like, let's see what happens. But I need to show my kids, but I really wanted to, because I felt alone in it. I felt crazy. Like, I'm the one, because I'm told, everyone around me is telling me I'm crazy. And I'm like, hey, this isn't going to just be 2 shots. You're crazy. You're a conspiracy theorist. It's just get the 2 and you're done. And now we're up to 10, so, but I'm crazy. And I just kept having to swallow that. And, so I didn't want anyone else who was feeling like me to feel, at least there's one person out here who cares enough to go, hey, this isn't right.
Yeah.
Me getting it for me not getting it for me, I have a medical exemption, but it's not just about making it big enough for me. Like, you shouldn't have to have an excuse here. Like, no is a complete sentence. Are you going to get this? No. That should have been acceptable anywhere.
Yes.
And it wasn't. And my wife and I did a lot of research on everything. I mean, we sent this screen grab that she grabbed off the FDA or CDC's website, January 2021, that clearly said, while we did not test this for specifically for transmission or anything. We are hopeful that it will, blah, blah, blah. It's not there anymore. That's why we grabbed it. And I've put it up online a few times and people always say, oh, that's fake. You made that up. It's not. I sent it to some of the smartest people I knew at the time and no one had an answer for that. And I would say, why are they saying it's 95% effective there, but that's relative risk reduction. It's not. The absolute risk reduction is less than 1%. It's the same as your chance of dying from it. So what is this vaccine actually doing? And if that's the case, why are they saying it's 95% effective when they know that that's based on nonsense? We're coming across all these things and none of it mattered because the industry as a whole was, hey, you've got to get this thing, if you want to get back to work. And I think largely that was the problem at the time, about the summer of 2021, when all this came to a head. People were starting to go back on tour, but we had spent a year and a half terrifying everyone to don't leave your house, don't touch your neighbor, don't breathe, don't go anywhere, don't gather in crowds. And now all of a sudden we want to turn the money faucet back on and get people out to shows. So, the industry by and large came up with the idea of the fully vaccinated tour.
Yes.
So now as long as we say that the band and the crew, everyone out there has been fully vaccinated and has their little papers and they're all perfectly good, wonderful people, that the crowds can all come back. Yes. Yes. And we're all going to sweat and scream and yell back and forth on each other. But, there's this magical invisible wall between the people on stage and the people in the crowd, and it's fine. And at first, some artists came out and did shows where you had to be vaccinated. They would only play for, and that went away really quick because while they were figuring this out, they found out really fast mandating the vaccine on your band and your crew was good for business. Mandating on the audience was bad for business. Well, now if the audience doesn't need it, now why does everyone in the band and crew need it? And, none of it made any sense.
The way it's fallen apart, just the fact that, I remember having these conversations 3 years ago and the level of fear, it's just amazing to me that we're not talking about ancient history now. And now the way that, firstly, everyone acts like none of it, well, it didn't really happen, and none of that happened. I didn't do that. I didn't say that.
Yeah.
No one's apologized. No one's taken any accountability.
Yeah.
It's just moved on. Like you said, with the news cycle. Oh, new thing happens. I often say that Putin ended the pandemic. Soon as he rolled into Ukraine.
Yeah. Now we have a new thing to focus
on. The narrative just switched. Overnight. And all of a sudden, nobody cared. All this stuff that people have been freaking out about for the past 2 years, none of it mattered anymore. Everything just dropped. All the mandates, all their shit, just people, travel, party, like whatever. And it's like, wait, isn't that scary virus still out there? Aren't people? It's like it's still out there right now. No one gives a crap. You still got 0.5% of people who are still masking and still going with it all. But generally speaking, nobody cares. People are not getting their 10th booster.
Yeah, no one's...
If they were consistent, they would be.
Right.
But they're not.
Because back then, if you wouldn't do it, you were an anti-vaxxer, which is worse than being a racist. Or you're an anti-vaxxer. And now it's like, all right, well, if you're not up to date, are you on the bad team now? Are we all over here not taking it? But now it's okay. To me, the funniest thing was when, you get on an airplane and for the longest time it was, got to have your mask on, take it down to take a sip and keep it on, your sleep, whatever, have it on. And now it's like, please be respectful to, people that are still wearing them or whatever. And I was like, where was the respect for people who didn't want to? We were just called grandma killers and the worst thing, but no one could make a better argument of no one had an answer for anything that I tried to put out. And, so we put out that statement, I got swiftly canceled in the industry, but the amount of support that the weird thing, my wife likes to say that sticking my neck out and saying something made me a bit of a lighthouse in the industry, because then anyone who felt the same way I did reached out to me crazy, just bombarded with big artists, people I didn't know, but just going, hey, I'm with you. Sure wish I could say something, but I don't want it to cost me anything. And I was always like, all right, but where's your line? How many more boxes are you going to check, to stay on the good team? When you miss one, you don't have any capital built up. You're gone. That's the crazy system now. And it's been the same since, the Blue No Matter Who movement started, 10 years ago.
Mm.
And that blew my mind at the time because we'd be talking primaries and like, oh, who you support here? I was a Bernie Sanders guy. And, I would meet people that were like, doesn't matter, blue no matter who. I'm like, yeah, but who are you going to vote for in the primary? They're like, doesn't matter. I'm like, but this is the only time you get to influence the election anyway. If you don't pick a person here or push them on the issues, like we're going to get nothing.
Yeah.
But it's like, no, just got to beat the bad guy.
Yeah.
I'm like, all right, so now we no longer vote for anything. We're just voting against something. And nothing good ever comes of that. You don't get better results. We just get worse and worse. And then you accept less and less. And
Yes.
I feel like that's where we are now is we've accepted so much less that we're kind of stuck. And, so it was nice for me at the time to connect with people like you. And, I know there's a difference between 3 years later than the person I was then. I was still very shell-shocked.
Yeah, I remember, man.
And,
I remember clearly. It was about 3 years ago exactly.
Yeah, I was wrecked. And I was in no place. And I remember you at the time, you're like, oh, you should do all these interviews. I'm like, I got hit up by everyone, Tucker, everybody. And I turned it all down because I wasn't ready to talk. That wasn't my point. I wasn't trying to be the poster child for any of this. But they were the media was so ready to slap anyone who wouldn't get on board that, and I knew what I was getting into. I knew it was coming. And I don't hold it against anybody. However anybody handled navigating COVID, good for you. We were all put in an impossible situation, but for me to not say something like, obviously I was offered fake cards, I refused that because if I take that, now I've lost my voice. Now I'm hiding.
Yes.
I've added to the numbers for something I don't believe in or that I believe is potentially harmful, and now I can't speak. Now how do I protect my family if I can't speak? How do I take care of my kids if I can't speak? So it was, the amount of people that would show up online yelling like, oh, you gave up my dream gig, you're such an idiot, you're afraid of needles, this and that. It's like, you can't have a conversation with someone who has no capacity for nuance on these very nuanced discussions. Mm-hmm. And I learned really quick that people who are determined to misunderstand you will find a reason to still not like you. Like if they're determined for it. And I, realized eventually that it was like, okay, well, all I can do is say from my experience what I feel, how I feel about this. And I don't get to have a say in how it's received by anyone else. Mm-hmm. Like it's not my business. It's like creating art. You make a record, you happy with it? Great. You put it out into the world, you don't have any control over how it's received. And that was where I found a lot of peace, was finally realizing that I don't have to take it on that someone doesn't like me. I don't have to change their mind. Like it's okay. Like I have no control over how I'm received. And like I said, I've gotten death threats. I've gotten death wishes to my family.
Death threats for what?
Just the most awful stuff because I wouldn't do it. It was like, I hope you get sick beyond recovery. I hope your family also gets like your children.
I interviewed my friend Colin Wright earlier this morning, and he was talking about some of the backlash he's faced. He's an evolutionary biologist.
Oh wow!
True man of science, and he speaks a lot on the whole gender discourse and males claiming to be women and blah blah blah. He's just very much in like, look, this is the biology, this is the reality of it, and he was dealing with the same, cancellation attempts, people blocking him from getting jobs, getting fired from his institution, like people just attacking. And I just made the point, like, people who do that are doing evil. Mm-hmm. That is evil. If you send somebody a death threat because they didn't take if you send a stranger a death threat because they didn't take a medication, that they don't want, like, you are the bad guy. Like
Mm-hmm.
that is psychopathic. Like it doesn't even make sense. This isn't even like a political thing or like it's just the most bizarre thing. So the fact that there are people out there who you just give them any sort of room or opportunity to attack someone and they just gleefully jump at it and use that weapon, to me, that's just wickedness.
Yeah.
It's just wickedness. It's the spirit of Cain, to use like the sort of biblical terminology. it's that it's the same mentality that has caused the worst stuff in history. Let's put it that way.
Yeah,
Just
well,
on a small micro scale.
for sure. And even just sticking with the vaccine mandates, like it really turned people into this, you've done the right thing, you're on the right side of history, you're the good person. Like it was this wall of virtue signalers. And I think the public, like personal pressure on people, the social pressure for everybody to get it was intense. It was insane. It was like
I was there.
Yeah, you were the worst person ever if you won't do this thing. And it just didn't make any sense to me.
No.
You know, there was no.
And vaccines aren't new.
Yeah.
This never did. I know the attitudes towards this in the U.S. is a little different to how it is in most of the world, because you guys have your whole like massive childhood vaccination schedule and all this kind of stuff in most places. Like, you know, it's just not that big a deal.
Yeah.
And so the idea that I always make the point that no one's ever lost a friend for not taking a flu shot.
Yeah.
Like no one gives a crap. Right? Oh, did you take your antihistamines like this allergy season or not? Like, who cares? Like, if you think you need it, take it. If you don't. Like, that's generally how we view all of this stuff. Yeah. It's like when people get mad at the other area where I see this, where it's just hyper irrational, is when people start getting hyper intense about like what diet they follow. Yeah. And they literally will start like hating or like attacking someone because they have different food preferences. And I'm like, are you okay? Yeah. You're mad at what this guy eats or doesn't eat.
How does it affect you
or vice
anyway?
versa? It's just like, okay, so maybe you don't want to be a carnivore, but if he's happy just eating steak, let the man eat a steak. Yeah. You want to be plant-based? Cool. Like, it's not that deep. Are you a decent human being?
Yeah. Well, it was wild though, because the propaganda pushing it. I mean, you could get everything from a lap dance to a cheeseburger to French fries to a lottery ticket to
half an hour in a brothel.
Yeah. Yeah.
In the Netherlands.
I saw that. Yeah. Go. You know, the lady of the evening of your choice, but just do this thing. And it was like, number one, when has the government ever prioritized our health really about anything? Oh, no. And because it was nothing about like, hey, make sure you're getting sunshine and eating right. And let's look at what it was just like. No, just all you can do is this pharmaceutical intervention. This is it. That's it. And everything being rammed down that one pipe. And that people were just not just lapping it up, but picking up the mantle of, I'm going to go after anyone who won't do this. And I mean, even here in the Nashville music scene, there was, you know, there are tons and tons of stories, but one of them was, you know, one guy was going around in the studio scene getting people kicked off of sessions for not being vaccinated. And then not just that, then going on Facebook and outing them to the entire community, going, don't work with this person. You know, they won't do the right thing. You know, but then you click through and, you know, they've got BLM in their bio, you know, they're all
pronouns.
Yeah, tolerance.
I'm sure
and
this
love.
person is convinced that they would have freed the slaves and hid the Jews and fought against the Nazis.
Yeah. And then another guy running around going to all the venues and appointing himself like the sheriff of Nashville and calling the police and going, hey, they're over their capacity here. They've got too many people at this place. Gosh. Just ruining anyone who was trying to. It's like, if you want to live in terror and never leave your house, okay.
Self-isolate, please.
I would like to not live like that, and I'm not gonna. Yeah. You know, to me, it was more than the single issue. It was, you know, personal freedom all around. It was like, we don't have to live like this.
How does that person feel now?
I don't know. They all.
I want to have a conversation with that person. I'm dead
Let me call them up for you.
I want to have a conversation. Like the people who were like this, because these individuals existed in like every city and every region in every country. There were those people, and now this many years past it, I want to like talk to them and be like, hey, all these things that you said and did.
Yeah,
like,
how do you feel now?
How do you feel? Are you apologetic, or do you still think, oh yeah, it was the right thing to do? Like, I'm genuinely curious because I don't know. I'm trying to like put myself in those shoes, and I would feel if I had been that guy, which I never would be, I would be so ashamed, so apologetic. I would be like begging for repentance. Yeah. I wouldn't be able to just like go on with the rest of my, would just go on and be like, oh yeah, like that was fine. I would feel to this day, I'd be like apologizing daily. I couldn't deal with it. I'd be like, no, like I messed up that badly. I mistreated people that badly over nothing.
You would think, right?
Yeah.
Like go back and make it right.
Yeah.
And that's, I think there's such an opportunity here for anyone who got carried away in this, which it was hard not to get swept up in it. I mean, we had already been primed for division through the whole first Trump presidency, and everything was just divided down the middle. And you bring this up, and no one wants to be thought of as the bad guy. Like I got called everything in the book just for saying, hey, I'm not going to do this. Yeah. Like from people I was close to for years and years and years going, I don't understand you. You're a Trump guy now, you're this and that. And I'm like,
what's that got to do with it?
I'm like, yeah, exactly. Like I don't understand like, you know me.
Yeah.
And even if I were, like when have we ever just destroyed relationships over politics or personal choice or something, so I will tell you from experience, the amount of people that my family and I lost, which was a ton of our lives, very few of anyone has come around with some real, I think I can think of 2 instances of people that came back and said, hey, I should have been there for you guys. Like I got scared to be, guilt by association. I got swept up in it. I didn't understand why you would not just get it. So 2 people have come around and said, hey, I'm sorry about that. And I've been nothing but gracious and so happy to welcome them back in our lives, because it's just a little acknowledgement of like, hey, I've had plenty of people that couldn't run away from me fast enough at the time. 2 years later, I'll get a text message like, oh, I was just going through my contacts and saw you. Yeah, it's been a while, bro.
Yeah.
And I'm just like, nope, try again.
Yeah.
Like you don't get to just whistle back in like nothing ever happened. Like you bailed on me and my family at our lowest moment, at the time where we needed community and we needed people. You took off. So come back with something better than, hey, it's been a while. Because why has it been a while? I didn't go anywhere. I haven't changed. Even it feels like the world is shifting around, but I'm still standing in the same place that I always was.
Yeah. One of my greatest concerns about that whole thing is, did people learn and what did people learn? And I sort of flip-flop on this. Like I definitely, for sure, a lot of people woke up, no question. Globally, there are hundreds of millions, must be hundreds of millions, if not a billion plus people who are more questioning, more skeptical, more aware of the authoritarian urge, all of those things, even if they've adjusted quietly. But the lack of accountability and lack of acknowledgement and repentance and request for forgiveness and that kind of stuff does make me wonder, like, gosh, like after all that, did they learn the lesson? Did these people learn the lessons you're supposed to learn? Did they work out, oh, actually, okay, whether it's lessons about big pharma, lessons about the media, lessons about just human psychology and their own authoritarian instincts, lesson about how you should treat and shouldn't treat people, like all of these things. To me, that's the big takeaway. If it was like, okay, people really learn from this and it is not going to happen again, because what do we say with every historical atrocity? Never again.
Right.
We can never let this happen again. We can never let, everyone's convinced, oh yeah, I would have been the good guy in that situation. Statistically, you probably would have been the bad guy, or you would have just been apathetic, like quiet, and tacitly supported it by not standing up.
Yeah.
Only a small percentage of people do. And so that's what I think, like whatever is going to pop up in this next century, and there's going to be a lot of things. There's going to be a lot of opportunities for authoritarianism, totalitarianism, massive infringements on freedom. We're seeing it happening. Brazil just banned X. I was with some Canadians yesterday. Canadians cannot legally access many media sources now, even on Instagram, Facebook, etc. You've seen that. Like you go on some Instagram pages. So like if you go on if you're a Canadian in Canada and you look up Rebel News or you look up Tucker Carlson Network, you cannot access
Can't even get there.
the content. Like it's just straight up censorship. You get a note saying Canadian government has restricted.
Yeah, we've decided that you can't handle this.
Yeah, and it's just like wild. Okay, so you're Canadian, so you cannot view Tucker Carlson's content. Like,
Yeah, we've decided for you that this is not good.
Yeah, that's North Korea vibes. I mean,
Mhm.
I live in the Middle East. I live in the UAE, and people
Yeah.
are worried about censorship. Something I can access whatever there. I don't even think they think of restricting something like that. And that's Canada. I thought Canada, isn't that your liberal government in power
Mm-hmm.
stopping you from like all of this stuff is weird. It doesn't end.
Yeah, the attacks on free speech that are popping up worldwide, like it again, like I'd never seen any coordinated campaign like COVID, where everyone, all world leaders seem to get their marching orders and it spread like wildfire. Like
Yep.
today's 3 years to the day of the mandates being put out by the Biden White House.
Oh, okay, yeah.
And I remember exactly what he said. He said our patients. It's a pandemic of the unvaccinated. We've been patient with you, but our patience is wearing thin,
Yes.
and your refusal has cost us all. And like that's some 1984.
Remember the Christmas message?
Oh yeah, the winter of severe illness and death. Yeah,
For you and your family.
yes, I know. And I'm just like, come on, like
Wow.
who's writing this? Like, but to see that coordination roll out, like the day that they decided that pandemic of the unvaccinated was the new thing, by 2 hours later, every world leader was repeating the line.
Yep.
And it feels like this is another, they're kicking the tires here on free speech worldwide. And I know in the US we have the First Amendment where a lot of countries don't. So they kind of don't understand why it's such a big deal here. And for people to start splitting hairs of what is protected speech and what isn't, like that's dangerous. I mean, that leads us nowhere good, because all of our other rights, at least in this country, to me, every other right stems from the First Amendment, from free speech.
Yes.
Everything else follows from that. If you topple that, there's no foundation for anything else to build off of. And it's super dangerous. And again, we talk about progress. We talk about how fast the world is changing. You can say from 1900 to 2000, crazy. 2000 to 2024, maybe even more change.
Probably about the same
in a quarter of the amount of time, right?
Yeah.
Like it's escalating quickly. So, for me, when Brazil is shutting down X and the UK is going after people for their social media posts.
They've been doing that for years.
Really?
Yeah,
that's
that's not new.
That's not new.
No,
All right, tell
that's
me
not
more
new.
about that.
And in the UK, there's a new category. Well, not new. It's existed maybe for about 5 years now. So obviously you have hate speech and hate crimes in the UK. So UK, hate speech is something that you can be fined or, prosecuted for.
Mm-hmm.
And then they also have a lower category called non-crime hate incidents.
That is so...
Which are also logged with the police. So it's, hey, you didn't commit a crime, but you were close, Pete.
Right.
You
Now
were close.
you're on a list. Yeah.
Yeah. So there's no penalty, but they log, okay, there were, hundreds of X 100,000 non-crime hate incidents. So this can be, telling a certain joke online or, people have been investigating for. I remember when a teenage girl posted some Snoop Dogg lyrics to her Facebook profile, and it had the N-word in it, and she got investigated. I know people personally. I know a guy who was prosecuted for a joke, and found guilty. I know another guy who the police came to his house. He posted a poem on what was Twitter at the time. This is, I think, 2021. And the police came to his house and said that they wanted to check his thinking, quote unquote, because he'd posted a poem that was making fun of men dressing as women. Mm. And so, yeah, in the UK, I think Americans forget that the US is the only country in the entire world that has the freedom of speech protections that it does.
Right.
Every country, as far as I'm aware, has some form of either hate speech laws or blasphemy laws, or they'll call them different names, and the sacred cows are different.
Right.
And I've made this point with people before. So the three countries I spend the most time in are all the united ones: United Kingdom, United States, United Arab Emirates. And there is stuff that you can say in the UK that you can't say in the United Arab Emirates. But there's stuff you can say in the United Arab Emirates.
How do you keep
can't
it all
say
straight,
in the UK,
right?
right? So if you want to like go super ham on every aspect of woke stuff,
Right.
and you're in Dubai, no problem. Like they're super anti-woke over there. Like, you can crush that stuff into the dust, right? Whereas in the UK, it might be like, oh, you're being anti-LGBT, or oh, you're a misogynist, or oh, you're a racist, oh, you're this, right? Like, they're hypersensitive on all that stuff, and so it's just like country to country, they have their different sensitivities and taboos, right? They're in Germany, again, because of their history. It is completely illegal to display a swastika.
Right.
It is illegal to deny the Holocaust. It is illegal, right? There's other places where, like, again, like maybe someone shouldn't do those things, but
Right.
you can.
But you can't.
You can say it, and you're not going to go to prison. Germany, like, if someone said that didn't happen,
Right.
you can have the police at your door and go to prison for it. So it's just like, actually, each place has its sensitivities, and in the U.S., it's like it has the greatest protection. But at the same time, most Americans don't feel comfortable to voice their views. I remember
Right.
being here in 2019 and 2020, and I have lots of conservative friends and Republican friends. And I remember I came to the US and I was like, 2019. I remember coming in 2019. And I was like, I have not seen a single MAGA hat. Like I see them on the internet or what. I was like, and I had all these friends who I know have them. They're like, dude, I would never wear that in public. You can't wear that in public. You'll get beaten up or whatever.
Yeah.
Like you'll get attacked. And I'm like, that's interesting. So you can't wear a hat that supports the current sitting president who's over 70 million people voted for. Probably like half the country at least are support or are sympathetic to.
Right.
You can wear Bernie merch, you can wear Hillary merch, you can wear like whatever, but like if you wear this hat, that has consequences. You might get fired from your job or lose your friends or whatever. So it's like, even here, it's like you have freedom of speech, sort of, but the social and financial and career repercussions and all of these things can be so severe for things that are not even, we're not talking about someone who's like a full-blown like white supremacist with like, or someone with like horrible views. We're talking about not taking a certain shot. We're talking about supporting an extremely popular candidate.
Yeah.
And these are the things that, nope, that's a complete violation. You're going to get blackballed. You're going to get canceled. And so it's like, legally you got freedom of speech, but realistically, it's been massively stifled.
Yeah, for sure. And then, to bring it back to art and music, look at what we get out of it. We have artists now that are afraid to speak. Everyone is terrified. I mean, I like to say the whole industry is in legacy protection mode. No one's going to put out a song that's about anything.
What do you mean by legacy protection mode?
Like they're worried that if they say the wrong thing or tweet the wrong thing or tell a joke or whatever, that their entire career is going to get canceled. Like, because that's all it takes now is this one thing. And now the mob comes out and it's like, burn all their CDs. I mean, you can go back to the Dixie Chicks 20 years ago going, hey, we're embarrassed that George Bush is from Texas, and everybody lost their mind. Right. And like canceled, they went away for a long time. But that's what's happening now is, I
don't know the Dixie Chick story. So what? Did they get canceled by conservatives?
Yeah.
Okay, interesting.
Yeah, the whole country scene, just went and overnight they were just like back when people were buying CDs and things, taking them to the radio station, throwing them at the,
And now it's spun around.
Yeah, and now it's the other way around. But I think so many artists now are afraid to have a stance on anything because they don't want it to cost them anything. And you're going to upset somebody. I mean, there's the online outrage mob is a real thing. They wake up every day just going, all right, who are we mad at today? Let me log on and see. And then they jump on it. Like everyone loves a pile on, people piled on me, but like I try to tell people, I'm like, all right, you're afraid of being canceled, but you're making more out of it than it is because the wave hits you fast. By the time you're on fire, they've already picked 10 other people that they're mad at and they're moving on. Like, and the thing I try to express to anybody that's afraid to speak out about things is there's a freedom in there when you are cut off, when you know, polite society is taken away from you as an option for the time being. You can finally just relax and be like, well, I'm happy where I'm at. Like I'm glad that I spoke out. I'm glad that I keep speaking out. And people get mad at me and going like, why are you still talking about this? I'm like, because I'm afraid you're all going to not show up again.
Mm-hmm.
Like I will stop talking about this when there is some accountability for what happened. You know, anyone that's like, oh, this is all you ever talk about. It's like, well, this destroyed my life. And I'm not a victim here. I'm not this thing that happened to me. Like I'm an artist. I create. This thing happened. It sucked. It was devastating to me and my family.
And to billions of people.
Yeah. And not just me. Like there's so many other people. Like it's important for them to hear you're not the only one here. You know, I've met people from every aspect of everywhere around the world. And all of them initially had the same story of, I thought I was the only one that felt like this. Thank you for having words that I could show to my family who don't understand my stance here. Thank you for giving me something to share that's not screaming at the sky. You know, I think there's a responsibility to, when we do speak out about things, to do it in a way where we're not dismissible, because the cancel mob looks to dismiss you. They want to find one thing you did wrong or said wrong, and now you're all bad. Mm-hmm. And so I think it's more effective when we can talk to people from a place of nuance, from a place of discussion and conversation. Like I'll have a discussion with anybody that wants to talk about something if they're showing up in good faith. If you're just showing up and determined to just misconstrue everything I say and twist it around and think I'm a terrible person, then we're both wasting our time.
Yes.
Right. But I think if we can have rational conversations and talk about things from our own standpoint, like I don't ever try to put words into somebody else's mouth. I don't ever try to pretend that I know what somebody else is thinking. I only talk from my side of the fence. Here's what I went through. Here's how I feel about it. Tell me how you feel about it. You know, start a conversation rather than an argument. Like everything doesn't have to be an argument, but that seems to be where we end up defaulting to nowadays. And we lose each other. We lose community. Like my family lost community. Like, you know, the people that I had been working with for 14 years, our kids grew up together.
Yes.
Our wives were friends. It wasn't just me that got erased overnight. My whole family got erased overnight. I've got to explain to my kids like, oh yeah, we're never going to see these people again. I'm sorry. And
crazy.
Here's a whole other wave of people who don't like us anymore.
It's so crazy because, you know, I've been asked a lot because I was super vocal on everything from like March 2020. As soon as they started announcing the lockdowns, I was like, this is weird. This is not normal. It's not going to just be 2 weeks, guys. This is all weird. You know, I was speaking throughout the entire thing, and you know, gosh knows how many hundreds of millions of people saw those posts. And my experience was interesting because I get a lot of people asking me, like, you know, did you lose any friends over that, or like any family thinking? Not one.
That's awesome.
Zero for me personally, and I was loud.
Yeah.
I had some arguments, sure. Mm-hmm. Did everyone agree with me? Oh no, not even in you know, my own family. I'm the only one who took the stance that I took. Mm-hmm. But I could always explain it, and the love is supposed to overcome the disagreement. So sometimes I don't. It sounds like this might be like condemning a lot of people, but I think people who like lost friends over this just for having like totally reasonable opinions. I'm like, I don't know how real that love was.
Yeah.
Because it's like when people say, oh, I had this friend for 20 years and then they found out I voted for Trump and we don't talk anymore. I'm like, was that truly a friend?
Right.
Because if you actually love someone, not just like you enjoy hanging out or whatever, like something like that is not remotely significant enough to
like, be a deal breaker.
No, not even slightly. I have all sorts of disagreements with friends, family, like it's totally normal. In fact,
as it should be.
Yeah, it can make the relationships closer in some ways and more empathetic because I'm like, okay, I don't agree with you, but I can see your perspective and I can get why you think that way. My personal equation or my personality plus my experiences or whatever leads me to this different conclusion. Yeah. But It's not that like you're a hateful bigot or I'm a hateful bigot or you're a horrible person. It's just like, okay, cool. Your math is different. And this is why also from the beginning, particularly when it came to things like, the masks or the shots, I never told anyone to or not to really do it. Because that was just like, look, even if we just, there's thousands of factors, but even if we just take one, age, okay? The math for my dad who's 70 something is not the same as my math who's like, was in my mid 30s and perfectly healthy. Just that alone is, particularly with that illness, is a very significant factor, right? Why are you treating 18-year-olds and 8-year-olds the same as 80-year-olds? Like, we already know, we've got the data on this. Like, that came out pretty early. It's like, okay, if you're elderly, like if an 80-year-old man decides to like you get the shot, like, I'm not going to begrudge them. Like, maybe it makes sense for you. But for someone else, it's like, okay, you can still if you want to, but the factors are just different. People have different living situations. Like, there's all sorts of things. People have known and unknown health issues and situations and contraindications. Some people have like 3 different underlying conditions. And so I can understand that person being like, hey, if I look at the numbers on this thing, like if I were to catch this, like my mortality rate is pretty high. So I can understand someone like that being, okay, maybe I'll take a punt and try to de-risk it this way. Like, I don't begrudge any of those people. My thing was always about the force, about the mandates, about the nastiness, the division, the ostracization. To this day, I don't think I've ever asked someone even if they took the shot.
Yeah.
I don't think I've ever even asked someone, let alone like, attacked someone based on it.
Well, it shouldn't matter.
Like, I just don't care. I never cared before.
Right. Since when did we ever in the history go around airing our medical stuff out in public?
I don't care.
I didn't like having to air my medical stuff out in public, but it was like, well, here's where we are.
Yeah.
I'm fascinated by your story where, as outspoken as you have been, that you really haven't lost a lot of people.
No, zero, not even one.
Okay. That's incredible because, I mean, to me, the amount of people that I lost, and not just that, but that people now are like, well, how are you still friends with anyone that feels differently than you? And I'm always scratching my head that that's even something you would consider questioning. Like when I'll be like, oh yeah, my best friend here in Tennessee, we don't feel the same way about any of this stuff.
Sure.
And we're still like, he couldn't be a bigger support to me.
Yeah, you love each other.
Yeah, absolutely. We love each other no matter what. And they're like, well, then what do you talk about? I'm like, anything else. Like, what did we used to talk about before we were taught that we had to be divided into this or that, and that you had to pick one. And I'm tired of pick one. I just want to exist. I like existing in the nuance. I think that word is sadly underutilized as well. Like, where we can't have conversations anymore because if each of us is just ready to yell our talking points that we got from the TV, we're not even talking. We're 2 television sets arguing with each other and they don't care, So it's, to me, we used to have rules like, oh yeah, you go to a dinner party, you don't talk politics, religion, or money. It's like, okay, cool. And now that seems to be the first thing anyone talks about.
Do you know what's interesting? Is I never liked it when people said that. I think you should talk about those things.
Yeah.
I think you should talk about them because I think part of the problem, I think the reason some of these, oh, I lost these friends, I lost these family members or whatever, is like when I talk to someone who's like, I've had conversations with people and they've said things to me, oh, this guy, I was best friends with this person for 15 years and then they found out I was a conservative and we don't talk anymore. And I'm like, how on earth did you have a friend for 15 years who you said is your best friend and they didn't know you were conservative already?
Yeah.
Like, how?
Did they know anything about you?
Yeah, like I'm confused by that. I'm almost like, wait, so how did you totally dodge all of those conversations and elements of your values and stuff? I'm like, I know where my friends stand on things, whether they're libertarian, conservative, more liberal, more progressive, just in the middle, apolitical, whatever. I know their religious views. I know which of my friends are Christian, which ones are Muslim, which ones are atheist, which ones are agnostic. But like I know their positions because we talk about these things. And I think there's a danger in that if people avoid all of these things, then whenever it does come out, then it causes this sort of system error in some people's brains where they now associate all of these So sadly, there are millions of people out there, for example, who think that if someone is conservative, then they're a bad person. Or if Republican equals bad.
Yeah, people were throwing that at me like it was an insult. And I'm like, how are you
right,
insulting
So,
half of the population?
Okay, Republican equals bad.
Yeah.
Whereas actually, if you had been discussing these things over the years and you know people of different walks who have different opinions or vote differently or whatever, and you're like, okay, well, they're decent people because I know people like that. So it's like I'm a Christian, and if someone came to me and was like, oh, all atheists are terrible people, I'd be like, no, they're not.
Yeah.
Like I have many, many good atheist friends who are wonderful, decent people. So yes, we have our theological differences and about, the universe and the world and how we all got here and what it all means. But to just make like a blanket statement that they're all like wicked or evil, I'd be like, that's goofy. And I would like to think that any of my atheist friends, if someone came to them and was like, oh yeah, Christians, like all those Christians, they're just like hateful, racist, evil, white supremacists, bigots, Nazis, whatever. They'd be like, no, that's BS, because I've literally got, like, I know tons of good Christian people.
Well, and it's hubris too, to be
simple.
like, I'm right, and if you don't think the way I do, then you're all wrong. You're in the bad pile.
That you're a bad person.
Yeah, like, why do we all need to be right? Why can't we learn something? Why can't we talk to people of different backgrounds and different beliefs than us and just have a conversation?
Yeah,
It doesn't have to get heavy.
And there's 8 billion people in the world.
Mm-hmm.
So if your worldview is that everyone has to think exactly like you and like and dislike all of the same things you like and dislike, or you cannot associate with them, it's going to be really lonely for you.
It's a rough ride. And how boring.
Yeah.
How boring if we all had to agree to the same things and we all had to feel the same way about everything. Like, I don't want to be in that world. Like, I want art that's challenging. I'm not afraid of being offended. Like, say what you need to say. I have friends that fully support me behind the scenes in the music industry, love to hang out privately, won't go near me in public,
I don't like that, man.
I don't like it. I'm just kind of like, what are you afraid of? Like we talk about cancellation. One of my friends, I think he's more afraid of being canceled than anyone I've ever known. And I'm just kind of like, and he's fascinated by what I've been doing the last couple of years. And I'm like, I'm just living. I'm not afraid of it. People call me all kinds of crap every day. I don't care. I don't have to take it in.
The craziest thing with in your case in particular is like, it was just for not taking a shot that you weren't supposed to medically take anyway.
Yep.
It wasn't even like, I've spoken to people who they had some big shift or something, right? They were very much on the left and then they had some red pill moment and now they're like supporting Trump and they're full conservative, right? Like with those ones, it's still silly, but I can understand the sort of whiplash effect that people who have known them may think. Whereas in your case, it's like, this is not even it's not like you've done some like complete 180 shift, and you're now kind of like way over here. Like you are so soft-spoken, mild-mannered, just like reasonable, nuanced. It's almost like, okay, like what's anyone even mad at here? Like I'm not really getting fiery rhetoric. It's just like, it's very odd.
It's super odd, but I think it was just timing too. Like when my situation came to a head was right at the absolute frenzy, right before the mandates came down through the White House. It was, everything was peaking at that time, and it was just like a little tinderbox, and if you poked your head up, they chopped it off.
Yeah, I do remember. You must have connected with Winston Marshall.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
I remember that was around the same time as well, because I remember with his one, it was he posted a tweet.
Yeah, that he liked the
saying
book.
That he liked the book.
He liked the book. And
like that, the response is insane. It's
insane what he went through. Yeah. And like we got to be, like me and Winston got to be friends through Twitter of just like, hey, I saw what happened to you. That is not right. Hey, I saw what happened to you. That's not right. Like, and you just kind of sit in that, like, because I don't think anyone understands it until you go through it, of like, what did this feel like? And you're like, it's surreal, because all I said was, I'm not going to do this thing, or hey, I like this book, and the entire world punched me in the face. Right. And I met another drummer here in Nashville a few months ago, and he had been a long time with a huge artist here forever, and even longer than I was with Offspring, and he got fired when he refused to take the vaccine. And he and his wife were the first people that I met that understood, like that had sat in the same place I did, of like, how many years did I put in here and it counted for nothing, and we are erased, and like the erasure, the abandonment of it. I was like, because some people, yeah, I can tell people my story and they're like, oh, wow, that sucks. But they understood, like, these people were your family, and the next day they were gone.
Yeah.
And, I like to say I ate every plate of shit that I was served for 14 years. And the first one I sent back, it was like, oh, you're done. Yeah. It was that simple.
Yeah. Pete, what's next for you?
Oh, man. Well, most of the time I'm working out of my studio. I'm composing a score for a documentary right now, and I do, commercials and film stuff there. I've made 4 different sound packs on the Splice website, so you can get my drum loops or my one-shots, put together your own music with my playing. I have a band called the Defiant that I'm working with, and we would be at the
Awesome.
Rescue the Republic, right? And at the end of this month, so I'll see you again there.
Awesome.
And so, yeah, we're out doing shows, playing festivals. I work with a couple other bands as well, out playing shows. So I'm just doing music all the time. I do drum tracks from people out of my home studio. So people send me songs from around the world. I lay down the drums, send them back.
Amazing.
But yeah, I'm just keeping busy doing that and speaking out, and trying to stay sane in an insane world.
No doubt, man. Well, you're doing a great job. Thank you for your courage and truthfulness and speaking up in a world full of cowards, to be honest with you.
Oh, thank you.
And where can people follow your work?
Instagram and X just at Pete Parada, and I'm not on Facebook. And also you can find me on my website, just peteparada.com, if you want to hear some tracks from my studio, or you need drum tracks, or you want to check out the sound packs. Anything I do there, you can contact me through there, and let's make something.
Awesome, man. Great to talk to you, Pete.
Thanks for having me.